Hi, so I figured I'm gonna start doing some Onshape tutorials piecemeal to go over various concepts within Onshape. So I already did post a video recently about how to add MKCAD and Featurescripts. So if you haven't added Featurescripts and MKCAD, please add those because I am going to be using them in this tutorial. So in this tutorial, I'm going to go over variable tables, how to create them, and some basics to how to generate some of the bar extrudes that we'll be using for the drivetrain. So I'm going to start by creating a new document. I'm just going to call this one Onshape training doc. You can call yours whatever you want. You can use the same document as last time. So I'm going to start off by working in this layout. So as I mentioned before, you have a part studio and an assembly. And I can make local variables if I want to, or I can make global variables. I'll start by making some local ones. I'm going to select the top plane and I'm going to sketch on that plane. So right now, I'm going to start by making basically just the outline of what my drivetrain is going to look like. And I'm just going to use the center point rectangle and line tool for that. So I'll start with my center point rectangle. I'll kind of just go out like that. And I'll have a line here. And I'll have another line there, same side. I could mirror this if I want to. I'm just showing you how this would be done. And then you'd have a rail going across and you'd have a rail going down the bottom as well. So right off the bat, we have a bunch of shapes that are kind of already filled in. I could make all of these construction lines if I wanted to. For now, I'm just going to leave them solid because we're not going to extrude this. Again, I'll show you what's going on in a bit, but right now everything is blue. I can drag everything every which way that I want to, and nothing is really complete. So let's say I want to only have variables in this space. What I could do when defining a dimension is click over here and then type in #L, and it'll show create a new variable. And if I do that, I can say L, say the value, which in this case, I'll call it 25 inches. And then the description will be length of drivetrain. And then if I hit enter, it'll create that variable for me within the space. And you'll need to zoom out because, it's bigger now. So that's pretty useful, right? So that is one option that you have. You could create a variable in the local space. But let's say this document is for the entire drivetrain. Let's say I don't just want this variable to exist in this part studio. I want it to exist across all part studios and all assemblies and all drawings that are shown, right? I don't want this to just be in this one part studio. Here's what I'm going to do. Well, for starters, I'm going to change the name of this variable to length just for practice. And now I'm going to click on this plus sign and I am going to say create variable studio. So I can go into this variable studio and I can do the same thing as before. Type in an L, type in the value for L, and the description. It's length of drivetrain. I can create as many variables as I want as well. I can create a W, that's going to be a length as well. And I can make that 30 inches, and I can make that the width of the drivetrain. I'm doing this kind of backwards. The width should be flipped, but whatever. As a matter of fact, I can also actually take the combination of these values. Watch this. I'm going to say diff, and that is going to be #W minus #L. And it calculates that for you. Now, let's say I want to be a little bit more complicated than this. Let's say I have the total frame perimeter. I'm going to call it FP. Now, the maximum frame perimeter is 120 inches. I don't want us building at 120 inches. I beg teams every year, not just this one, but other teams, to not build at exactly 120 inches. So let's call it 112 inches, right? Okay, 112 inches. And I'm going to create W2. Let's figure out how to make W2 dependent on frame perimeter and L. So what happens if we just say FP divided by 2 minus L? Oh, right, I'm going to need the hashtag over here as well. Let's see what happens. it does the math for you. So I'm just gonna double click that so you can see the math formatting. So you have the pound key frame parameter divided by 2 minus L, and it generates that math for you. So that is one consideration to make, but here's another consideration. What happens if frame parameter is the last one that I define? Uh-oh, what's this? That's weird, it was working before, wasn't it? So the reason I showed you that is because the order in which you make variables actually does matter in this variable studio. Another thing that matters is whether or not you have insert into all part studios and assemblies selected. So if I deselect that, let's go to part studio and see what happens. Let's go back to edit the sketch, and I'm going to try to define this as, that's weird, it's not showing up. That's not good. So if it doesn't show up, then you won't really be able to define anything with it. So what I would do if I were you is if I say variable studio 1, you'll need to insert into all part studios and assemblies. Otherwise, you won't be able to, well, actually, let's see here. So you have a variable table, right? You can say part studio 1, and you can insert variable studio, and you can insert the one you just created. So if you only want to add a variable studio to specific part studios, you can do it that way. But if I were you, if you know for a fact that you're going to be using this variable studio across studios, then just insert into all parts and assemblies. You can also rename the table if you want. You can insert a variable studio from another document as well. You have a lot of options here. So with that, I'm going to have this inserted already, and that'll populate over here in variable studio 1. You will also still have the local variables from part studio 1. That's going to be really important for you to note. There is another important thing I should probably point to, which is what happens if I select this and I type in hashtag W. So I have W and W2 because those both existed in that variable studio. But if I say new variable and I say 28 inches, that's weird, it worked. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem like it should have worked. So what ends up happening is W over here is 28, but this W is 30. So I'm not an expert on variable studios, but I do believe this means you can override a variable studio based on what's in the part studio. I also kind of wonder if maybe the order matters. Actually, let's see if the order matters. Let's do a little experiment here. I'm going to create a length, and that is going to be 12 inches. That is comically small, but let's see what happens. Okay, so length was made after this length, and it does not seem to have overridden. You do, however, have a warning saying that it was overridden. So yeah, that confirms our theory. If you create a local variable, it's going to override the global variable that you inserted from the studio. So that's a little consideration that you want to make, right? Another consideration is that all of your bar stock is going to be the same length, width. So you could actually create a bar width and have that be your variable. As a matter of fact, we're going to do that right now. BW, and that's going to be 1 inch. And I'll put that description in later. So then I can go like this, and that'll be BW. And I'll do that, and that'll be BW. Yes. And I'll do that here as well. And you can see how this is really powerful for things like drivetrains, where you can just sort of change the dimensions and set it up so that you can just reuse it from year to year, right? And you could make this a publicly available tool. As a matter of fact, ours is publicly available. So you can see why that variable space drivetrain that we created is really, really powerful, and why our students are so awesome, because they made that. They're awesome. So speaking of awesome things, now we're going to have to create each bar, right? And because we have this sketch, we actually have a really simple way of doing that. So I'm going to click on this sketch right here. And actually, no, we don't have to do that. What am I talking about? We can just extrude and then select this specific face, let's say. So yeah, I'm going to select this entity and this entity and that entity. And because it's new, it's going to create this part from the ground up. And I'm going to make that 2 inches because we're dealing with 1x2s. I'm also, we don't have to make it symmetric. I'll show you what it does. Symmetric just makes it symmetric about the plane that you're extruding from. I do generally like that feature. So yeah, I guess we'll do it. So now we have this whole bar. So a few points of order. If you want this sketch to always be shown, you're going to have to hover over it and click on that crossed out eyeball. The other thing you're going to want to do is actually label some of these things. So I don't really like leaving things as just part one. I would strongly suggest you label it as something. So I'm going to say, let's call it DT bar 28 inches. I'm going to call it width maybe. And I guess we'll determine what stock we use afterwards. So just DT bar width for now. You can also define the material, but I'm going to show you a little shortcut for this that'll kind of override that material. So remember that feature script I told you all about? Specifically, this one right here. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Tube converter. So what happens if I click on this as our body to convert? Oh, what's this? A hole pattern. And ooh, look at that. It created the opening. Now, let's say I don't actually care about whether or not it's VersaFrame and I just want, say, 1 inch between each hole. Oh, look at that. Look at that. It creates the hole patterns for you. Now, what if I have Versa with custom spacing? Maybe I have 0.75 inch spacing. It does that for me. It's really cool, isn't it? I'm going to leave it at VersaFrame for now, and I'll leave the hole size alone. You can also have an offset from the end if it's not centered on the tube, which could be useful for us depending on how we cut our bars. And if you check mark it, look at that, you have your tube converter 1. And if you select this and select mass properties, you'll notice that it actually does have mass, volume, and surface area. This means that it actually did calculate for you based on the material properties of the tube, which is really useful because otherwise you'd have to right click, edit material, and actually select something from the material library. It does not automatically fill this out for you. So here, let me show you another thing. Let's say this is purely a structural element. It's just a bar hanging on the side and you want to lighten it somehow, right? We don't really have the ability to CNC our bars yet, but let's say we did. Here's what I'm going to do. I am going to select isogrid pattern. And I am going to select this as our region to pattern. It's going to take a bit of time to load. And then you should be able to generate, let's see, rib thickness. Oh, that's a bit thin. Fillet radius, let's go 0.25. And I believe face extrude 1, I think you need to go through, don't you? Yeah, I think for some reason this is not selecting the entire bar, so we're going to do this. This should do it. Let's find out. Nope, it didn't like that. Let's see what's wrong. Okay, we're gonna undo that. So, cool stuff. We're gonna try doing, once again, the isogrid pattern. And we're gonna do regions to pattern. We'll do that. We're gonna do a depth of 1 inch. Yeah, that's good. Lighten bodies. It's taking some time to load, but that's fine. Ah, there we go. So it looks like you will have to select the entire body for it to actually do the thing. Just to check, yeah, it looks like you need to select the body. Oh, no, you do need to select both. Okay. So you'll need to select the face and the body. That way it also has an idea of where to go through. And you actually do have some control over the rib thickness, fillet radius, and even the hole diameter for how the pattern is actually going to look. And when I select the check mark, it is going to have the pattern done for you. Now you'll notice it is starting to take, oh dear. Now you'll notice it is now kind of taking a bit more time to load. So part of that is because you now have this much more intricate pattern on it. This is something that you're only going to be able to CNC. if we go over here to your performance, you'll notice that there's a lot more primitives and the regeneration time is now much higher. Versus if I suppress this, see, you still have the primitives there, but the regeneration time is a lot less. So the reason I'm showing you this is I strongly urge, if you're going to do stuff like isogrid patterns, to have a simplified thing to put into your Onshape. There is another reason I'm bringing that up. A lot of the parts from MKCAD do not have materials or masses built in. And especially for things like assemblies, you can't really neglect it when calculating your center of gravity. So if you want to do a rough center of gravity calculation, you might actually need to create a simplified model to put in its place. So again, for this, 159 milliseconds to load. And you can even see the wheel turning right now. That's how bad it is. And once the wheel stops turning, I said, once the wheel stops turning, come on. I know you're better than this. Come on. There we go. Oh, see, 4.8 seconds. It took even longer. And look at all those primitives. So many primitives. It's loading up all of those things at once. So my recommendation to you is, if you only need this for the CNC machine or for a rough weight calculation, suppress it when you're not using it. Saves you a lot of time, saves you a lot of resources. One team I talked with at SVR in 2022 said that they were taking almost half an hour to load their entire assembly because they just had so much going on. So do keep that in mind when you're using Featurescripts. I'm not coming against Featurescripts. I'm saying just be aware that that is something that will happen. All right, so I showed you a Featurescript and I showed you some variable stuff. What else do I show you? Oh, actually, I can think of something. Let's say I want to create a gusset. I could just do a projection. Actually, you know what? Why don't I show you right now? If I want to create a gusset, one way I can do that is by gonna go top down. I can use a projection, which is going to be this button right here, use projector convert. And I can kind of just select the relevant geometry and then just sort of draw over the area I want to put the gusset on, right? So do be careful about projections, because if, for whatever reason, I get rid of some of these holes, I could end up getting rid of the gusset as well. That is an option for me. I could do it like this and then just dimension from here to here. Let's call that 0.5. And now I can extrude this and have a gusset, right? So there is another option, which I don't necessarily recommend, but it is kind of useful. I am going to show you the gusset tool. So gusset tool will take holes that you select. So I'll select this one and this one and this one, and it'll generate a gusset just sort of going around those holes for you. You can also change the thickness if you want, which of course affects going that way. You can have a fillet radius. You can also select the material over here. Ooh, you can do a carbon fiber gusset. I worked with carbon fiber. It's interesting. You can make it convex. You can select edge holes. There's a lot of different stuff you can do with this, and it'll automatically generate that gusset based off of those features. So let's say I go to this tube converter, I edit it, and I change it so that there is an offset. I'll add an offset of 0.25. And let's say I do a custom spacing and I make the spacing 0.55. That's unusual. And I hit the check mark. It does update the gusset with that. Now, again, I am going to warn you, anytime you use a Featurescript, you do have a slight impact on your load time. So again, this is a very minimal impact, but you are going to have more than one gusset. So again, the main concern with Featurescripts is for the really meaty ones, like the isogrid pattern I showed you, it could end up significantly increasing your regeneration time. This one I'd say is low load enough that you don't really need to worry about it, but this is also a low application enough procedure that students don't necessarily need to use the Featurescript. Just thought I'd show you. All right, how long have I been talking for? I feel like I've been talking forever. I think my throat's just sore. I think one other thing that might be critical to show you now then is the assembly. So you notice I only created one bar over here. In the assembly, you actually only need to create one instance of a bar, and then you can create multiple instances here. So let's say I actually do want some features to be different on these bars. So I could actually add a configuration panel if I wanted to and configure this part studio. So let's say there's a default called space, and we're going to configure the spacing of these holes, let's say. So I am going to right click on tube converter, edit, and for pattern start offset, I am going to select configure. Actually, no, not this one. I am going to leave that one alone. Let's do hole spacing and configure that. So for the spaced out one, I could say this is going to be 0.75. And when I hit the check mark and I select spaced and say switch to space, it'll actually modify as I go. And then when I go to the assembly, I can right click this and say change configuration, and I can change the configuration to spaced. And it'll change that for me. So I'm not sure how often that's going to be used on the team, but I can see it being used for cases where you're maybe not sure which part you're going to go with yet, or maybe you're not sure what thickness of material you're going to use. You want to see both, but you haven't really decided between the two. That could be an option for you to just toggle between them without having to go in there and change the variable yourself. All right, so I think that's enough tools for today. It is late and I have been talking a lot, so I am going to stop this recording now. If you have any questions about this, let me know. All right, thank you.